cover-up had little to do with Watergate. It was mainly to protect the covert operations. It leads everywhere. Get out your notebook. There's more. Your lives are in danger.
I don't know about you, but when I think of journalists having sources, I go straight to Watergate and that scene you've just heard from All the President's Men. Robert Redford, Deep Throat and all of that. It made it seem like sources were all these mysterious, shady people in political thrillers who expose secrets and bring down governments. They meet journalists in underground car parks and creep about in the shadows. The reality, of course, is much more banal, but it's important for PRs to consider nonetheless. Journalists need sources to exist. Often they come in the form of nationally recognised news agencies such as the Press Association or Reuters. And these agencies create news content that journalists can lift straight into their newspapers and TV broadcasts without fear of inaccuracies or bias. But journalists also need sources from other areas too. People from within government, experts and academics, members of the public on social media, and, of course, press releases. What makes a good source for a journalist? Well, accuracy, reliability, impartiality. And you might think that last one is a bit of a problem. Most of you no doubt work for companies, and commercial entities are not known for being impartial. But there are no excuses for the other two. You can certainly be accurate. You can always be reliable. Remember, journalists are communications professionals just like you are. If you can understand what makes them tick and the pressures they're under, you can become a valuable source for them and forge lasting relationships that will greatly benefit you both. I'm Tom Clark, and this is The Perfect Press Release, a podcast that will help make your press releases stand out above the rest. This is episode 4, A Trusted Source. Once you've written your press release, you need to know what to do with it. Of course, that'll be dictated mainly by the people that you're trying to reach. Who are you targeting? What's your audience? For every press release, it'll be different. But broadly, your audience might fall into 3 main categories. First, we have journalists. That's the media, newspapers, broadcasters, general press, but also trade media, more niche, industry-specific journalists who might work for websites, magazines, and blogs. Next, you might want to target the investment community. That is, people who might be interested in helping you financially. And finally, you have consumers, the general public, and often this might be the most important audience of all. In the old days of PR, everything was driven by finding support within the media in order to reach your end customer. But today, because of the internet, it's possible to bypass the media completely and get your news to public audiences directly. But let's not try and run before we can walk. Journalists are still essential to PR people. Aside from anything else, they hold huge sway with their own audiences. People literally pay them for their content, their newspapers, their magazines, their opinions. So if you're going to be successful, you need journalists on your side to carry your story further and to give your stories credibility. And your pre-existing relationships will be an obvious starting point when you have a new press release to send out, as PR Director Duncan McKean explains.
Most PR agencies will have a list of target media that they maintain themselves, and that's built on personal relationships and knowledge of media working in that sector. And that press release will get emailed directly to those individuals on an individual basis, on a named Dear Henry, Dear Tom, Dear Sarah, whatever, on an individual basis. But you then have other options of conveying that news. Social media is helpful if you have relationships with those individuals. You can't paste a press release onto social media and send it out. Firstly, because it's indiscriminate, and you might end up sharing it with people that you may not want to see it, but more importantly, the format doesn't allow it. So the way to pitch news via social media is to already have established relationships where you can privately direct message individuals, say on Twitter, or privately post a link on LinkedIn or wherever, in a messenger app, effectively.
In previous episodes, we've looked at the relationship between PR people and journalists. We called it the bridge. And a big part of building that bridge is understanding the way media works. Here's journalist Lauren Potts.
It's about doing research about the publication that you're pitching it to and not just scattergun approach, sending it to everyone. Because, if you're trying to pitch something to the BBC, it has to be a certain way. And that's going to be very different to sending it to Daily Mail or, whoever. So you've got to do your research about the publication and think about why they would publish your story and what you need to include in order to get it in there.
So, the more research you do on your target audience, the more likely they are to respond favourably when you have a press release to push. That starts with finding the right names at the right organisations, moves into building relationships with those journalists, and sometimes it extends right through to the classic pub crawls in the taverns of Fleet Street.
Press releases are about communicating information to press at a point in time when something is new. But you can't have new things all the time, every day. It would be very noisy and busy and a bit boring. So the rest of the time is spent developing relationships with journalists. And I mean actually, going out for a cup of coffee, going out for a beer, finding out what they're interested in, finding out what they're writing about, finding out what the publication's general direction is. And if it's a broadsheet that you're talking to, a Telegraph, a Times, a Guardian, an Independent, whatever, they may have a particular political slant or leaning that you need to accommodate if you're then pitching them, and you're tailoring your story accordingly. And then when it comes to actually making a news announcement, you're able to more accurately tailor your story, the pitch and the communication to those media because you've spent time getting to know them. It's a bit like dating,
Of course, you can't take every journalist in your little black book out for a slap-up lunch or you'd soon go bankrupt. So you need to find a way to blast your press release simultaneously to multiple people. And that's where PR tools like media databases, newswires, online syndication is where they come in. They're designed to take your news beyond your core audiences and into new ones. But it can be a minefield. You can spend almost anything, from a few pounds to boost your press release on a single website, to hundreds of pounds for well-researched lists of journalists, to thousands of pounds for international newswires that translate your press release into different languages and distributes it to local media far beyond your normal beat. The tools you use will depend on your budget and the scope of your audience, so you need to be realistic. Typically, tools are cheaper, certainly more cost-effective, if they simply give you access to your audience and let you get on with your own PR activity. Most obviously, these are media lists or media databases. You pay for access to the contacts, and then you do the work yourself. You send the releases, you follow up with the media, you build the relationships. The great thing about media databases is you typically pay one fee, and then you can use them as often as you like. And often they are vast, these databases, with huge numbers of journalists and detailed contact information and data. Here's Andrew Woodall, who's worked with these databases for years and knows the real value they deliver.
The global media databases have roughly 1 million contacts. I mean, it differs from company to company, and some companies count their contacts in slightly different ways. But a top quality global media database should have around about 1 million media contacts. And that would include media from almost literally every country in the world, and it would be organized, as I said, by what are known as outlets or publications. So obviously the media companies, the newspapers, the TV stations, etc. And then you should be able to see underneath each of those outlets the list of journalists that work for those outlets, or the freelancers as well, or bloggers. So a media database would have TV hosts, radio producers, reporters, editors, bloggers, etc. The full range of media employees should be represented there. and they should be organised by the subjects that they write about, the geography that they're based in, the reach of their target audience by geography, but also by demographics, so the type of consumers they're looking to pitch their media work to.
Databases work well if you have the time and resources to do the PR bit yourself. But there are other tools that will go a stage further. They don't just give you the data, they leverage their own relationships and reputations to help you distribute your press releases further. These are the newswires I mentioned earlier. Now, if you know me, you'll know that I can spend many hours waxing lyrical about newswires, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But alas, we don't have the time here, so I will be brief. Newswires are great, but only if you use them correctly. With newswires, all those press release rules we've talked about in previous episodes become even more important, to the point where your release is likely to be rejected if you break them. And that's because the bedrock of newswires are news agency feeds that carry your press releases into the heart of all major newsrooms, along with the breaking news of the day. In the UK, that news agency is called the Press Association. In the US, it's the Associated Press, and there are similar agencies around the world. And these news agencies hold great value because they're so well trusted by the media that subscribe to them. And newswires help you piggyback onto that credibility. But newswires aren't just about carrying your news to media via the most credible channels. They're also about giving your press release a lasting digital footprint. They publish your release on prominent websites and other online platforms that are used by some of your core audiences. Websites like Yahoo Finance, Apple News, Business Insider, vast IR terminals like Bloomberg. And by posting your press release to these places, you're getting beyond the media. You're getting in front of non-journalistic audiences. That's potential investors, analysts, and consumers. Of course, there's vast competition in these spaces. The wider you want to send your press release, the more noise there is. Other releases jostling for position. And so it's even more important that your story stands out. It has to be immediately compelling. So the biggest piece of advice to give about selecting the right tool or the right newswire or channel is be realistic. Don't throw thousands of pounds at an expensive international newswire if your story doesn't warrant it. The easiest way to figure out the right tool for you is to look at your target audience. As a general rule, newswires are great for reaching very wide, consumer-focused audiences. National and regional newspapers, for example, investors, and the general public. So the stories here need to reflect that. They need to have wide appeal. They need to be very topical or tap into very general themes that we're all familiar with. But on the other hand, if your story is very niche, very industry specific, very technical, then sending a newswire can be counterproductive. The general press aren't generally going to be interested in a very technical press release. So that's where media databases can help you target the most appropriate technical journalists. But if you do go down the newswire route, one big benefit is that most newswire services have teams like Andrew's who'll help you optimize your release.
Our editorial team will receive the content from the client, and generally what we receive is a pre-written press release. So the client has written their press release themselves, so they're not expecting us to rewrite it or create the content for them. But what we do have to look out for is any mistakes or anything that could get the client into any legal trouble or prevent the ultimate recipients, i.e. the media, from running with the story. So we need to make sure the client has the basics such as headline, media contact details, and any supporting information for the content that they're issuing, and need to make sure that the content is not offensive in any way or potentially libelous or making any claims which cannot be backed up.
One of the most common questions I get asked is when to send a press release. To be honest, there's no one-size-fits-all answer to this. If you're using a newswire, it can actually be less of an issue because newswires simply inject your press release into the news cycle. And And these days, that's a 24/7 thing, right? Besides, your release is effectively out there forever if you use a newswire. It has an online presence that means people can still see it long after you send it out. But when you're targeting specific journalists and publications, it's important to understand the rhythm and the cadence of the newsroom. We're trying to be a good source, remember? So understanding the pressures that journalists are under will help you build that reputation as a trusted source and ensure journalists are more open to speaking to you. But remember, it might be different from journalist to journalist and publication to publication.
I had lots of different specialisms because, there's not very many people who work on a local paper, so you often have to wear lots of different hats. So I think at one point I was the council reporter, the health reporter, the business reporter, the features writer, and the crime reporter. So there was a lot to go on there. So Friday was usually looking ahead to Monday and Tuesday and going, have I got a council meeting that I need to go to? Do I need to fit in a trip to magistrates? Is there a trial up at Crown? And then it was sort of, figuring out if you could do those and how you would do it and how you'd fit it all in. And then Monday and Tuesday were always the slog days where you were bashing out all of your copy. Monday and Tuesday were not really the days to try and get me because they were the days I was normally doing interviews and ringing people and chasing facts and calling press officers and saying, where's my picture? Where's my quote from the council leader? And then Wednesday morning was chaos. So, you'd be in at 8. Deadline, I think, was 12:30 or 1. And I used to get this guy that rang me all times of the day. Didn't matter to him what day it was. And he, without fail, used to ring me on deadline pretty much every week to tell me something completely, irrelevant. Like there's a water mains burst or something. And I'd be like, oh my God, why are you ringing me? I actually recognized his number and I would just not pick up the phone. Don't call on deadline. That's my message, really. Just don't do it. You're only going to get short shrift from a journalist on deadline. My advice there would be find out when publications are going to print and stay well away. Unless you have an amazing story that absolutely has to go in that edition, call the next day instead when the journalist is nice and relaxed and has a fresh slate and they can actually talk to you properly.
So we've looked at media contact databases and newswires and looked at some of the tips you can use to ensure you're seen as a valuable source for your target audience. The final tool, the final piece of the jigsaw, if you like, is to look at how to measure the success of your campaign. And for most PR people, this is the real crux. How can they show the value of their work, the ROI, to people paying their wages? That's their clients, their bosses, or their paymasters. Monitoring press coverage in the aftermath of a press release distribution can be a complex business. One article in a target publication can be worth more than hundreds of postings on meaningless syndicated websites. And that's why the best monitoring tools try to cut through all the noise and show you the real value of your coverage.
In reporting on your press release's pickup, you should be able to review the geographic distribution of the press release, but also the audience reach. A lot of the metadata that comes in with media monitoring solutions is providing exactly what the clients need to prove their ROI. So you can say, I've spent X number of pounds or dollars on distributing this press release, but look, it's reached Y number of people. So you should get that with a media monitoring solution. You can see exactly how many people it's reached, in which geographic distributions. So this is the impact of having sent out that press release.
And what about sentiment? Because that's one of the newer sort of metrics that we can measure. Explain the value of being able to understand more about each piece of coverage that your news has received.
Yeah, absolutely. So it does depend on technology to identify the sentiment for each mention, but it will be attributed to every single mention. So you'll be able to see, is this story being mentioned in a positive, a neutral, or a negative light. And again, that's something which you can report on within a monitoring tool, and you can compare your sentiment for your press release to a competitor's sentiment for their press release, for example, or you can track your own press release's sentiment over time. So it's really powerful tool of seeing, okay, I've sent out this press release, what's the reaction to it?
A lot of it is about managing expectations. Press releases are not magic bullets that guarantee to turn budding entrepreneurs into the next Elon Musk or send your sales figures rocketing into the stratosphere. But if you get them right, they can be the best way to carry your message forward, to tell your stories to the audiences that matter most to you, and ultimately to give your business a boost. So, a quick recap on what to do once you've written your press release. First, try to act like a trusted source for your audience. Once you have a reputation for delivering quality, compelling press releases, your whole job will become a lot easier. You can build lasting relationships with individual journalists, and your stories will carry more weight than those of your competitors. Next, you need to choose the right tools and services to carry your press release to your target audience. Media lists for technical releases, newswires for consumer stories, maybe a blend of both. And finally, set your expectations to realistic. If one press release fails to hit the mark, learn from it and try something different with the next one. That was the last regular episode of the series, but stay tuned for several bonus episodes in the coming weeks, where we'll look at some specific elements of press release strategy, including the pros and cons of AI and the best way to approach the investment community. And of course, if you've got any suggestions for further episodes, please don't hesitate to get in touch. Thank you very much for listening. The Perfect Press Release is written and produced by me, Tom Clark. Editing is by Jay Vidalingham at Clement Stories. If you'd like any help with writing your next press release, or if you want to book a free press release consultation, you can connect with me on LinkedIn or through my website. The details are in the show notes. And on a completely different note, I'm also working on a new true crime podcast because, well, who isn't these days? I'm on the lookout for interesting, offbeat, historical crime stories. The more intriguing, the better. Maybe you have an unsolved mystery in your local village, or a nefarious great uncle who was always in trouble with the law. If you have any ideas, please get in touch. Thanks for listening.